There was once an island in the waters of San Pedro Bay, before the massive port was built, an island full of bones of forgotten people. What happened to this island? Why is it not here anymore? Welcome back to Waste Media. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified every time we post. This is the forgotten story of Deadman's Island. Before the cranes and the cargo ships, the waters off the Los Angeles coast were wild, covered in mudflats and scattered islands. Deadman's Island was one of the southernmost outcrops. The Spanish called this island La Isla de los Muertos, the Island of the Dead. The island was shrouded in mystery and folklore. Some stories claim that in 1810, Spanish fishermen found the sun-scorched body of a man who had died of exposure to the elements, possibly shipwrecked on the small island. Others believe the sinister name of the island came from an English captain, rumored to have been poisoned by his own crew and buried at the highest point of the island. There's also the story of a Native American man, forcibly removed from San Nicolas Island by missionaries and left to die alone on this barren rock. Each story of this island ended the same way, someone's death, alone and far from home. By the 1830s, the name Isla de los Muertos, or Dead Man's Island, had become its common name. The island stood out like a gravestone in the water. Although pictures make it seem small, it was over 800 feet long and 250 feet wide, rising 55 feet above sea level. By the mid-1800s, Deadman's Island was no longer just a burial site of forgotten sailors and lonely travelers. It became a battlefield grave. In October 1846, the Mexican-American War reached the southern California coast. A skirmish broke out between American forces and Californio militia, an engagement later known as the Battle of the Old Woman's Gun. During the fight, as many as 6 American Marines and sailors were killed. With no cemetery in San Pedro and no real infrastructure on land, they were carried across the water and buried atop Deadman's Island. It became the most prominent military grave in Southern California at the time, marked not by headstones, but by the island itself, now deeply associated with death. By 1858, local records indicated at least 11 bodies were buried there. The reasons were practical. The mainland was still largely wilderness. Graves dug into soft soil inland were often disturbed by coyotes or flooding. But Deadman's Island was natural stone, remote, defensible, and known. Approaching San Pedro by sea, it was the first real sign of land. The 55-foot rocky knoll rising from the otherwise flat estuary. But for many, especially the superstitious crews of trading vessels, it was more than a landmark. It was an omen, a warning. And with every new burial, its reputation grew darker. So, if you guys know this area, you know this port is huge. And actually, the Port of LA is actually the busiest port in all of the United States. It's about 43 miles of shoreline, this port in total. 43 miles of waterfront. That's how big this port is. It was officially founded in 1907, and it contributes to around $276 billion annually to the U.S. economy. So it's massive, super important. In the LA region, it's estimated that they employ about 1 in 9 people, which is crazy. I didn't know that. Through direct or indirect trade and logistics. By the early 1860s, the dark stillness of the island was interrupted by industry. Whalers from San Diego established a temporary station on the island and used it as a base to process their kills. In March 1862 alone, 6 whales were killed and processed here in 6 days, each one worth roughly $300 at the time. But the whaling industry was unpredictable and volatile. By 1866, the station had shut down. The island was once again abandoned. But as the 19th century came to a close, it was clear that Los Angeles would become a major port city. But it still wasn't clear where that major port would be located. 2 powerful interests were fighting. One side backed San Pedro as the new home for the major port, while another group led by railroad magnate Colin P. Huntington was pushing for Santa Monica. The debate made its way to Washington, D.C., where the Senate Committee on Commerce held hearings to determine which harbor should receive federal investment. San Pedro had natural depth and a long maritime history. Santa Monica had powerful lobbyists. Caught in the middle was Deadman's Island. Ultimately, the San Pedro-Wilmington proposal won. The US government selected it as the site of the official port of Los Angeles. But to make it viable for larger ships, the harbor would need serious reconstruction. And that meant everything in its way, including Deadman's Island, would have to go. As the harbor grew more industrial, Deadman's Island began to fade, not just from maps, but also from memory. Engineers had connected Deadman's Island to the mainland by a rock jetty in 1872, hoping to stabilize the harbor and encourage sediment flow. Instead, the structure accelerated erosion. By 1900, half the island had vanished beneath the waves. The War Department transferred control of the island to the US Treasury in 1916. Plans were drafted to raise it and repurpose the land. Its name was changed on paper to Reservation Point. The island's days were numbered, and while tourists and film crews still visited, few knew that beneath their feet were the bones of soldiers, sailors, whalers, and others who had no name at all. In November of 1927, the end began. 8 massive dredgers, a steam shovel, and over 20 train carloads of dynamite descended on Deadman's Island. The goal was to remove it completely. The port of Los Angeles was expanding, and Deadman's Island was considered a bottleneck, a relic of the past that stood in the way of progress. What had once been a mariner's landmark, a graveyard, and a film set would become fill dirt for a larger, modern harbor. But as crews dug into the earth, history began to rise to the surface. At least 23 skeletons were uncovered during demolition. Some were known, others were complete surprises. Among the dead, the 6 Marines from the 1846 Battle of Dominguez Rancho, 2 Spanish soldiers, a Native American woman, a man with an arrowhead lodged in his skull, and then one of the strangest finds of all, the skeleton of a blonde woman. No one knew who she was. She hadn't appeared in any burial records or military logs. She wasn't associated with any shipwreck or known events. Some speculated she might have been the wife of a sea captain buried in secrecy. Others believed she was a castaway, or worse, the victim of an unrecorded crime. By May 1929, Deadman's Island was gone. Reduced to 2.3 million cubic yards of rock and clay, used to create what is now Reservation Point, a 62-acre extension of Terminal Island. Today, the island is completely gone and forgotten. Check out the Patreon, I post exclusive videos on there. Link is in the bio and also at the end of this video. So there's a whole series on there. If you want to get more content, go onto the Patreon. Thanks for watching, see you guys next time.